fiction, science fiction, political monographs, writing primers, and even a young adult novel. So when you were listening to Jonathan Mayberry, where he is talking about crossing genre lines, he was a pro. He's won a whole bunch of awards that Barb already told you about. And today he's being interviewed by celebrated author and man who truly walks the talk, the Reverend Harry Williams II, affectionately known throughout Oakland and San Francisco's Tenderloin neighborhoods as OG REV. Last year, Reverend Williams won the Director's Scholarship and has since had 2 books published, When the Struggle is Real, OG REV's Hip Hop Prayers and Meditations, and Taking It to the Streets. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very proud to have national treasure Walter Mosely grace our stage. After his talk, he'll be signing books at Bookshop West Portal outside the ballroom. Be sure to pick up one of his novels or his 2 books on writing craft. You will be transformed. Let's give it up for Walter Mosely.
You may be looking at my name card and wondering, what do the initials OG stand for? Well, you won't have to wait until you get home to ask your favorite niece or your grandchild who's a hip-hop fan to decipher that for you. I'm about to tell you right now. The letters OG stand for Original Gangster. Over the years, the term OG has morphed into a term of respect for inner-city community elders. So when I walk into a barbershop, a young man might open the door for me, and when I say, "Thank you," he'll respond, "I got you, OG." If OG is a term of respect, then to call someone triple OG is to confer certified platinum hood status on this individual. And today, I'm honored to be sitting next to the triple OG of the ballpoint pen game, the incomparable, the unconquerable, the LA-born alchemist, the Dr. X, the shogun of the written word, one of the greatest writers of all time, and my favorite author. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time for Mr. Walter Mosely. Mr. Mosely, my first question is this. Can you tell me how you became an author? The first sentence that you ever wrote? Do you remember opening that first box and ripping the first copy out of the box? What was it like transitioning from being a 9-to-5 guy to being a full-time writer?
I don't know. I mean, that was a lot of questions. So, I don't remember, opening the box. But, I'm in California, but I am a Californian. And Californians are different than other people. They are. Like if you have a woman, who retires at normal age now is about 80, right? The woman retires, and anywhere else in the country you say, well, what are you gonna do? And she's gonna say, oh, I'm gonna spend some time with my grandchildren, and I would like to, see more of my friends and do some knitting. That's what they say. In California, a woman says, well, I realize that I can still touch my toes, so I think I'm going to do the ballet. And you think she's crazy, but a year later, she's performing in the White House, with a whole bunch of 80-year-old women doing ballet. It was a thing. I was in my 30s. I was a computer programmer. I wrote a sentence that said, on hot, sticky days in southern Louisiana, the fire ants swarmed. I wrote that sentence. I said, that sounds like a novel. Maybe I could be a novelist. And so I just started writing. I was a programmer. I was in my 30s, but still, I decided maybe I could do that. And I'm a Californian, so I wasn't worried about making money. I don't know why they don't worry about that out here. I was worried about being more being able to finish a story. And along the way, I ran across a writer, one of the greatest writers living writers in the English language, Edna O'Brien. And O'Brien said to me, he said, Walter, write a novel. And I loved her so much, I said, okay. And I went out and wrote a novel. And so there was this happened and that happened, and another thing happened, all of a sudden I was a writer. It wasn't my expectation, but I'm happy being it,
Mr. Mosely, I'm sometimes frustrated and angered by the cardboard stereotypes of black men that often appear in books. However, your portrayals of the brothers are often well nuanced, and they look like the people I've met in the pool hall, the church picnic, or the barbershop. Even people who are morally compromised, like Wolf-Ass and Mouse, have their good points. Socrates Fortlow did a murder bid for homicide, but he comes home to mentor Daryl. I've never found a bigger Thomas in one of your books. Very few authors can consistently portray street-level black men so accurately and with so much dignity. How do you do that, and do you do it on purpose?
Well, I think the second question on purpose, there are very few people, black, white, or otherwise, who write about black male heroes. And I'm saying heroes, not protagonists.
Yeah.
And certainly Bigger Thomas is a protagonist. That's a great novel. Visible Man is, same thing. I mean, you follow a lot of writers who write about black protagonists, and they're basically talking, about what it's like to be a black man in America, and what we've become, how we've been, mutated and changed and taken apart. But I'm interested, in writing about heroes. Easy is a hero. Mouse is a hero. Fearless Jones and Leonid McGill. Leonid's son Twill. They're all heroes. Like, they do bad things. And they might have spent their whole life doing bad things, but still, there are people who stand up for what they believe in a world that's against them. And I've always, that's always been what I wanted to do. It was what I wanted to do before I knew I wanted to do it. I wrote my third Easy Rawlins novel before I realized I was writing about black male heroes. But that's kind of like, the fun of literature, to enjoy it. I think, when I first started writing, professors, black male professors read books, but working class black men going to things, they kind of avoided books. They said, either you don't have me in the book or you misrepresent me in the book. And one of the things I think that the Easy Rawlins novels have done, and books since then, people say, oh yeah, I know that man. I know who he is, I mean, Jackson Blue, he's a coward and he's a thief, but he's the smartest man in the neighborhood. We know that guy. Easy Rawlins, we know that guy. And so that becomes the thing, because you want to see, not necessarily yourself, but what your knowledge is in the book. And I think that that's true. And you don't want false heroes. You don't want a hero, you don't want Shaft, you don't want somebody who never makes mistakes, knows everything, does everything, blah, blah, blah. The same thing with feminism. You want a female hero who represents who she is in this culture, not what the ideal would be in this culture, but how do you work toward that ideal? How do you become that thing? And so I guess that's the answer to your question.
I'm just like, I want to pitch myself. I can't believe I'm sitting next to you asking you these questions. You are a master of writing about place. You write about Los Angeles, which was a refuge for black people fleeing the South during World War II, as were San Francisco and Oakland. I can feel the streets of the new country and sense the awe of migrants acclimating to the new land when I read your books. When you describe Ptolemy Gray's house, I can see the clutter and the disarray. And you write with such economy. You create a world with a handful of words. How did you become so adept about world creation, and how do you do it?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I want to say, when I studied writing, I went to City College in New York. Edna was one of my teachers, but I had a lot of teachers. My major teacher was a guy named Bill Matthews, who's a poet. He's dead now. But Bill was a great poet, and he understood poetry. And he was actually one of the smartest people I ever met in my life. I mean, he knew everything. Everything. There's nothing you could ask him that he couldn't answer. It's amazing. But the reason I studied poetry is because in poetry you learn everything. You learn condensation. You learn metaphor versus simile. You learn the music of language and the music of rhyme. You learn word choice. Like you said, okay, you're going to choose one word. You're not going to choose 5 words. He was big, he was tall, he was gigantic. No, what was he? What's the word? And in studying poetry, I began to understand what is the simplest and most condensed way to present an idea, a character, a place, a time. And I urge any writer who's writing prose that if you want to write prose, you have to know fiction. I mean poetry. And in knowing poetry, you don't have to be good at it. I'm definitely not. But the thing is you have to know what the goal is in language. And 90% of the goals of language come out of poetry.
If you set out to do anything great in life, you have to ask a master how he sits about his work. They said that Michael Jordan was the first one on the court every morning. Is it true that you write every day? Did you write today?
Yes, I write every day. I write every morning. I get up, I sit down, I turn on my computer or whatever, and I start writing. And I do it every day because I look at writing the same way that one looks at psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is funny because it existed to deal with hysterical responses, to serious situations. We don't have that many hysterical responses anymore, so it doesn't really work. But the notion of every day you come and you free associate for an hour or 2 or 3, and then you let it go. And while you're the rest of the day, something's going on in the back of your mind, in the back of your head, and it connects to all these other places. And so the next day when you start writing again, there's all these new things. And it grows and it grows and it grows. And when you stop, you drift away from it. 3 days of stopping, and you have to do everything you did before just to get back to where you were. And so the idea of writing every day is the way in which I move forward in my fiction. When I first started writing, I was writing a book a year. This year, even though I'm working in a TV writer's room, I have 3 books coming out this year. Because every morning I get up at 4 o'clock and I'm writing on my book. And then I go to work and I say, well, whatever I got left, you can have. Pretty smart,
Mr. Mosely, the first time I ever heard you speak was at the African American Library and Museum in Oakland. And I think that day the audience was completely comprised of people of color, but most were frustrated because the publishing industry doors seemed shut to them. Fast forward 15 years later to the release of American Dirt. What have we learned from the furor surrounding American Dirt? Has it been a surprise to the publishing world? And in the words of the late Sam Cooke, is change gonna come?
Well, change has come. When I started writing 30 years ago, I was at the big book festival they had in Philly back then. There was a room, almost as many people in the room, all of them writers, none of them published. All of them good writers, I mean, writers today. But they couldn't get published back then. Today, there's 1,000, 2,000 people of color published, and they want people of color. I mean, they want to publish it because they're making money on it, not because they like the people of color, because they want to make money. And so that change has come. I think the thing with American Dirt, it's an interesting, problem. There's no issue about that woman writing that book. It's not wrong. What's wrong is that a publisher will actually say, it's more important that this person, in quotes, white. I want to tell you people, I don't believe in the existence of white people. I know that a lot of people out there think they're white people. That's bullshit. You ain't white people. Ain't no such thing as a white person. The tablecloth might be white. And if you look like the tablecloth, you're in trouble. There's all kinds of mixtures of colors and things and past and stuff. But there are people who believe they're white, which is the crime. It's a crime to believe you're white. Because what you're doing is saying, I'm different than someone else. And we're not. There's no difference. There's no such thing as black people. I've never met a black person in my life. And there's some brown people, no yellow people, and it's like. It's a weird notion, but the thing is that people who think they're white saw a book by a woman who thinks she's white about an experience that a whole bunch of people of certain culture have had, and people saying, well, this is really good, and they're not really thinking it, but they thought it was really good because a so-called white person wrote the book, which somehow gives it more validity. And that's the problem. You know, I'm not mad at her for writing her book. You know, why would you get mad at somebody for writing a book? Anybody can write a book, you know. Susan Straight, you know, she's a white woman, supposedly, who has, you know, married a black man, has all these black children. She writes about her experience in the black community. I'm not going to hold that against Susan. She's a wonderful writer. She writes great stuff. It's great, you know. But at the same time, you don't want people to begin to say, well, the so-called white culture understands better other cultures than those other cultures do. That becomes the problem. And, you know, that's why people responded, you know. You know, you know, I don't care that she wrote the book. I'm glad she got that big old advantage. You know? But I'd rather, you know, some people of color got that advantage. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, how come a Mexican can't get that advantage? You know, Mexican, $1 million? No, man. So what are you gonna do with that money? You know? I mean, really, honestly, I know people don't think they think that, but they do. You know? And it's the same thing as thinking you're white. You know, it's bullshit. You know?
I'm going to ask you, thank you very much. Let's give him a hand clap just for that. Yeah. Before we open it up for questions from the audience, I want to ask the last two-part question. First, who reads your work when it's in progress, even before the editor sees it? And secondly, what is the most powerful advice you can give to a beginning writer?
Well, the person who reads my books before anybody else is a guy named Paul Coates. He used to be the head of the Panthers in Baltimore in the 60s. He runs a black classic press out of Baltimore. He's also Ta-Nehisi Coates' father. He's my really, honestly, it's a weird thing for a guy my age to say, but he's like my best friend. You know, I love Paul. And Paul's really smart. He reads my books and he reads them as if he were, you know, somebody who likes reading my books rather than somebody who, you know, who has some kind of, you know, mechanical job of understanding, you know, literature. And, you know, and you know, and I avoid people reading my books. I really don't care. The editor said, why don't you do this? I said, well, because I don't want to. You know? I mean, damn, you know, I mean, I've read more books than you've edited, so. I mean, really. You know, the idea that, you know, that there's somebody in between that's going to tell you what's a good book. The second part of that question was what?
Do you have any advice for new writers?
Well, the only and the most important advice to any writer has levels to it. Number one, write every day. Every day, every day, every day. Don't take off Sunday, don't take off vacation. You know, if you're really sick, you can take it off. You know? Or if you're having a really good day, you can take it off. But other than that, don't take any days off. And understand that is what being a writer is. Being a writer isn't being published. Being a writer isn't being paid for being published. Being a writer isn't somebody saying that you're great or giving you an award or any of that other stuff. Being a writer is being a writer, you know? And that writer is a form of communication, which is one of the oldest and most sophisticated forms of communication in the world. You know, so if you're doing it, you do it. You know, listen, if you want to make money, you know, real estate, it's right out there, go into it. You know, real estate's going to make you rich. You know, but writing will make you sophisticated.
Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, one more hand.
Okay, you guys know the drill. There are 3x5 cards on the table. So if you have a burning question for this national treasure or the OG Rev,
Yes.
write your question, hold it in the air, and volunteers will bring it up to me. I'll ask the question, and you guys can go for it. Oh, and I did want to show the book. Trouble is What I Do. This is the one that comes out February 25th, and it's in our bookstore. So there aren't that many copies, and you can't get it till February 25th. So if you want to be an early reader.
You know, the title, while I'm waiting for these questions, Trouble's What I Do. You know, Sugar Ray Robinson had a fight, a match in Ohio long ago, and sadly the person he fought died in the ring. And so in that state, you had to have an inquest if somebody died from something like that. And so the judge was asking him questions. So what happened? He said, well, Your Honor, on the first round I was doing pretty good, but the second and third, he had me on the ropes. I was doing this and I was doing that. He said, but in the fourth round, I got him in trouble. And once I got him in trouble, I followed that up with some left hooks and a right and some up, what happened. And the judge asked Robinson, he said, well, Mr. Robinson, did you get him in trouble on purpose? And Robinson said, Your Honor, getting people in trouble is what I do. I've always loved that. And as I decided that trouble is what I do makes perfect sense to me. Yeah.
Okay, Walter, who's your favorite author?
A question like that, it really, gets back to the thing of, who influences you. And the thing I love about that, you're going to be talking to a lot of writers, right, over the next, couple of days or so. And, almost any writer you ask who influences them, almost every writer you ask that question lies. Young doctor always says, well, Phyllis Wheatley, because you don't know who she is, and Zora Neale Hurston, because you do know who she is, and then there's Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and Louise Donaldcott and ZZ, there's all these people. But they don't say that because that's really who influenced them. They say it because they want you to think of them in relation to those writers. Because, if it's a young woman, it's Nancy Drew, right? Honestly, they read Nancy Drew and they loved it. Nancy Drew was a black girl, she lived across the street, and in this house, this mysterious house that I wish I knew about, and you read it. And when you're a kid, you read stuff and you imagine it in ways that adults we can't even get there. Because listen, if you gave like a 7-year-old girl Beloved, she would kill either herself or her mother. Come on now. You kill your children, I'm your child. It's this crazy notion. So look, when I start to think of, influences, I start thinking of things like Jack Kirby and Marvel Comics. I start thinking about, Tom Swift, that I read and love so much. Treasure Island, Winnie the Pooh. There are things that make you love writing, and none of them have to do with this stupid literary world that, tries to dominate every fucking thing that we do.
Okay, number 2. How did you find the time and money to write your book when you were 30 and working full time?
I write every morning. 2-3 hours. I get up in the morning, I write for 2 or 3 hours, and I go to work and give them, the second watch. Whatever was left, I gave to work. And I think that, I don't think that anybody can do that, but I think that most people can do it. You find a time in which you can be alone, and you spend that hour or 2 or 3 hours doing your writing, and then you go on with your life. I do it now. I do have a job right now because I'm working in a writer's room, which I hate. But I still write every morning. If I have to do work at 10, I wake up at 4. I write for 3 hours, and yeah.
Okay, what are your opinions on self-publishing?
Well, self-publishing. Elin Harris. I remember when I met Elin Harris. He came up to me and said, "Oh, Mr. Mosely, I can hardly wait. I just hope that I can be a writer of your stature." That's when I met Elin. And then the next year, he was selling like 10 million copies of books. And I came up to him and I said, "Elin, I wish I can hardly wait for the day that I can publish." Yeah, he was self-published. A lot of people are self-published. I have a lot of friends who do it. Joy King. There are all kinds of people who do, street lit, self-published literature. And, it's great. It's a lot of work. It's not something I don't think I could do. But I think that it's worthwhile and it's valuable. And if you know who your audience is and how to get to that audience, then there's no problem with it.
What's it like to work in Hollywood? There's an open-ended question for you.
Well, Hollywood, you know about my op-ed piece, right? Maybe you don't. When I was working in this writer's room, and I was telling a story, to the other writers. People in the writer's room, they tell stories. It was like a spaceship thing, but I was telling the stories, and I said, when I was in LA, when I was a kid, I was walking down Robertson Boulevard, and a cop stopped me and pushed me up against the car and searched me and asked me questions and searched me again and asked me some more questions. And when he finished, he said, okay, you can go. And I said, so excuse me. I don't get it. Why did you stop me? Now, I was high. But he didn't stop me because I was high. You know what I mean? And so he said, listen, when I see a nigger in a Patty neighborhood, I stop him. And when I see a Patty in a nigger neighborhood, I stop him. Because usually they up to no good. And I just told that story. It was just a story. It happened to me. Next day, I got a call on my phone, my little cell phone. And that's something. I call back, and the guy says, excuse me, Ms. Mosely, my name is so-and-so, and I represent HR. And it has been said that you used the N-word in the writer's room. And I said, man, I am the N-word in the writer's room. And he said, well, you can't use that word, You can't use that word in the writer's room. And I said, why not? I mean, he said, well, you could write it. But you can't say it. And I went home, I just quit. I said, fuck that. I'm not working there. I'm not working for these people. Caused all kinds of trouble. Then I wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times, and everybody got upset with me. But it was, except the writers. Writers all loved it, because writers, writers are working class people. They make a whole lot of money, but they're working class people. They can't quit. So you can't, because listen, let me say, it's better to say nigger than it is to say N-word. I just want to say it. If you come up and say, well, they said the N-word, you just say they said nigger and don't say shit. You know what I mean? Because that's the thing. N-word makes it okay. Right? Nigger is trouble. And they said, well, how dare you say that? I said, well, because I said it. I said, well, suppose somebody got mad. I said, well, maybe we would fight. I don't know. But I believe in freedom of speech. I believe you can say anything you want. So, well, only black people can say, right? No, white people can say whatever the fuck they want. Because nobody got mad at me at saying Patty, by the way, right? Not even Irish people. It was amazing. But it's a slur. It's a slur to Irish people, but that's what the man said to me. I wasn't trying to insult Irish people or black people. And I think a lot of Hollywood is that. You're working, doing a television show in the 1930s, and then you have a woman thing, and a woman comes up to you and says, well, this woman has to have agency. And you say back to them, well, okay, fine, but it's the 1930s. Agency in the 1930s is not going to be agency in the 2020s. And people say, well, that's just because you're sexist. I said, no, it's not because I'm sexist. It's because I'm trying to write something about a time that existed. And if you can't do that, then you're going to have trouble. Because what you're saying is not going to be true. If a man come up to you and, says, well, I was 1930, and a man was come up to you and wanted to lynch me, and he said, well, listen, N-word. And I said, no, he didn't say that. He didn't say listen to N-word. What the fuck is wrong with you? I mean, and so Hollywood, I think, is having a lot of troubles. It's going through that, Hollywood has a lot of other troubles, but I won't go into them. But the great thing about it is, they pay you 47 times minimum wage, and I love that.
Okay. What parts of you are in your characters, or what characters are most like you?
Well, when you write something, I guess everybody out here who's a writer knows that when you write something, it's you writing it. Maybe it's not. You could be one of our, illustrious people who doesn't write their books. But I assume most people here write their books. And so if you write your books, then it's you who's writing the book. I'm not so much into telling my story, because my story doesn't seem very interesting to me. Like when I don't find myself being incredibly important or,
Oh, come on.
No. I might be important as, like, in a business kind of thing, but, I'm not Zorba the Greek, you know what I mean? Like you read about Zorba the Greek, you say, damn, that's somebody else, I'm not Muhammad Ali, I'm not, I'm not, a lot of characters, I'm not the stranger. And so I think in writing about those characters, you're writing about people who represent something in the world that's incredibly important to you and to your world. And so I don't find myself in the characters I write as a rule, because my characters go beyond me. And I think that that's important then. Because people reading are not reading stuff, well, I went down to the store and I bought some pork chops and some flour. And I came back and I put some salt in the flour and I fried the pork chops. I'm saying, well, okay, but I don't want to read about that shit.
Which poets do you recommend we read to learn great wordsmithing?
I think that it's interesting about reading what poet, because you have to read the poets that move you. Even though I have absolutely no respect for him whatsoever, I find the Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot unbelievable. I read those things and I go, damn, I just don't understand it, but I love it. I'm reading that, it's like, he's going on, and I think it's great. And so I think that, it's important to hear poetry. It's important to read poetry, and that poetry that you find that speaks to you, that's the poetry you should be reading.
Good answer. Okay, this one's kind of fun. Hello, sir. What was your inspiration for the character Mouse, who resembles my late uncle Mad Earl? May I add that the realism in your work is soul-filled. Thank you for being. I don't know what the question is in there, but...
Well, no, it's where does Mouse come from, and it's an interesting thing, It comes from the place that he's talking about, Mouse is, Easy Rawlins tells the story. That's why it's about him. But it's Mouse's world, right? And it belongs to Mouse. And Mouse is, he's the joint. He comes in there and he said, well, the sheriff, he grabbed me and he put me, and he chained my hands behind my neck, and he pulled me up close with his bad breath. He said, he's gonna kill me. He said, but he pulled me too close, so I grabbed him onto his throat, and I bit his windpipe right out. So I live, because I killed that motherfucker, And I think that everybody, like when Mouse says to somebody, he says, I'm in trouble with the IRS. And Mouse said, well, what's the guy's name? I'll go kill him. And Easy says, well, if they just hired somebody else, he said, well, I'll kill him too. And then I burn down the whole motherfucking courthouse. They ain't gonna know anything about you. There's not anybody in this room who doesn't want that friend. You know what I mean? It's like, because, the government's not on your side. It's like, you can be black, you can be white, you can be whatever you think you are, but the government is not on your side. And like, somebody like Mouse is. And who in life, other than your parents when you're young, is on your side? True.
Okay, unfortunately we have run out of time. I have one last question. What's the hardest part about writing?
The hardest part about writing, I can take that question a few ways, like, personally, like for me, what's the hardest part? I think it's probably the 18th or 19th rewrite when I realized that the plot isn't working. So I have to deconstruct the whole thing, But I think that, writing, books, but also articles, and, all kinds of different nonfiction and poetry and stuff, they are still the most important cultural thing going on in America. One day that might change, but it hasn't yet. Nothing has taken the place of it, And it's hard if you're a writer and you realize that you're performing one of the most important jobs, like termites making that the methane gas, which, without it, there would be no world. They use the goddamn termites, and people don't even like you. Say, but listen, man, without me, we wouldn't have a world. I think that's the hard part. The hard part is knowing how important, you are, what you're doing, where you're going, how much you're impacting the world, how there's nothing in anyone's life that isn't written, not a commercial, not a television show, not a song, not a speech, not a law. I mean, there's nothing that doesn't take your talent as a writer. And most people are saying, well, what's Denzel Washington doing today? You know, Denzel Washington don't know shit. Yeah, he ain't changing your life. The person who wrote that thing is changing your life. And
Thank you very much. Let's clear the red marker